Apologies for the delay.
Hello, Suzanne. Yes, the technician is attending that report.
Hello, everybody. Sorry that it's taken a little while to get started. Apologies for that. Thank you very much to the participants that are joining us now. Again, apologies for starting a little bit later than we had planned. We're all joining now. I can see the number of attendees jumping up quite quickly. So thank you very, very much. For participating in the breakaway sessions and for those facilitators who ran those sessions, as well as the volunteers who have graciously agreed to present back to our front office colleagues and the mission directors in this session. So again, if you weren't in the previous session or you haven't heard my voice before, I will also turn on my video if FPD will enable that function. And then we will join this session. My name is Catherine Hoflick. I am the Senior Capacity Building Advisor for the Capacity Building and Partnerships Branch at USAID. I will be emceeing this session, but it is an opportunity for the local partners to share their feedback to USAID and our front office leadership about some of the challenges and solutions that they've had during implementation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how other groups went. And so we're going to start with group one, which was facilitated by Jason Porter, and our gracious note taker was our capacity building and partnerships branch chief, Callie. So our reporter is going to be Lydia. And so if you could raise your hand, Lydia, we'll be able to unmute you and you can join the session and let us know in 3 minutes or less the highlights of your group one discussion around challenges and solutions for local context. Lydia, if you could raise your hand, I'll try and find you in the list. But you should be able to speak. If not, then I guess I will call upon Jason or Callie to present the local context group for group one.
Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Callie. Why don't you report back if you could advance the slides to the
okay, sure. Sorry, I think Lydia is not on yet. So do you prefer us to wait for her to join or to go ahead and present?
As much as I would love to hear Lydia's voice, we have very limited time in this session, and I know that we want to make sure that the mission directors have a time to respond. So perhaps if you could go ahead and go, and if Lydia joins, then we can unmute her.
Great. Okay. I'm just trying to see if we had anybody else from our group on, but I am not for sure that we do. Okay, let me put it back on the full presentation screen. Okay, and people can see this now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'll present, but if Lydia jumps on, please, Lydia, feel free to interrupt me. We had a great, excellent session, lots of comments. There were a couple of technical difficulties with people being able to talk, but we actually had quite a vibrant chat in the end. So we heard a number of issues raised around local context. First one was related to the VAT, and governments changing the rules, changing regulations around that, forcing organizations to self-fund. And so the solution was having someone at the mission really help navigate those challenges and work closely with the government on those policies. Secondly, I think a perennial problem is providing services to MSM and key populations, especially given certain government policies around working with those groups. And again, we didn't, have a silver bullet for that, but citing the need for effective engagement, both with Usaid and the government. Another policy issue was around multi-month dispensing. Pepfar and Usaid are, of course, really pushing to go to 6-month, multi-month. But the ministry in the country where this partner was from had a firm policy for only 3-month, multi-month. And so again, citing the need for close coordination with the government. And then we had quite a lot of discussion around this cooperative agreement versus contract, the way Pepfar operates. Many of our local partners have cooperative agreements, but they really function as contracts. And so for partners, it comes with predetermined targets and predetermined geographic scopes, which sometimes limits, their ability to have agency in determining that. And so a solution that we discussed was working closely with the local stakeholders to map those areas of implementation and target setting, and really to have more partner involvement in determining those targets and scope. Let me go to the next slide. Okay. And then a few other topics we discussed, access to information. In some countries, governments held the information, for example, on viral load tracking. And so it was difficult to access that for local partners. And that was just one example. There are other examples where a government had information of a different kind. And then again, some more around issues around commodities being taxed and being held up at port due to government policies. And then lastly, really an important one that we started to get into, sustainability often is an afterthought in the program design. And so I think these first 2 points were really, again, strengthening government, USAID facilitation to address some of those policy process barriers. And then lastly, really involving the local partners and the local governments when thinking about the sustainability of the projects, even from the beginning of the project. So that was all from our group. I don't know if others have joined from group 1. I hope I represented it well. I don't know if anyone else wants to share anything, but I assume we probably have to move on, right, Catherine?
Thank you, Galli. From reporting back, I'm sorry that Lydia wasn't able to join us and report back, but it sounds like you had a really fruitful discussion. I have an inkling that sustainability might be something that is brought up in several of the groups. And I would love to invite Jonas from group 2, although I'm not seeing him in the list. If you could raise your hand, Jonas, from group 2, I think he will have something to say about sustainability. I really hope that he's able to join us. Raise your hand, Jonas, if you're in the session from group 2. Otherwise, Callie, if you could show our slides, that would be great. And then I will quickly try and report back on what we discussed in group 2. We were focusing on local partner capacity. And Courtney, if you could keep a look on the attendee list to see if Jonas joins us so that he can speak. So I'll try and go quickly. We had a very fruitful discussion around local partner capacity. And one of the themes that several of our group members pointed out is challenges in startups. So one of the partners pointed out that it's challenging to get financing in advance to get off the ground and hit the ground running. Having to go to banks with really high interest rates and things like that. But also the whole timing issue is really critical. One of the partners mentioned that they were able to solve this issue, thankfully, because they did have some unrestricted funding to use for that early recruitment, those adverts in the newspaper to find staff, even before they had the money. But that's not an option that's available to a lot of local partners. Sustainability also came up in our group for sure. Sustainability of programming. One of the highlights that I thought we would also want to report back to the group is the communities that we're working in. This one local partner mentioned that they travel out into the rural areas and they meet with communities. Those communities have other needs other than the strict HIV/AIDS programming that they're implementing. And so one of the solutions that was suggested is that they write stories and advocate for communities to attract additional funding that is non-HIV/AIDS related, to advocate for the communities that they work in to attract additional outside funding. Some of the other issues were, again, around timing for funding, and they would really like to advocate for no more monthly reporting for financial reporting, that it be quarterly. So that was something that we discussed, and I think it's come up in several conversations during this week, the issue of indirect cost recovery. NICRAs, de minimis, and all of that. And one of the solutions that was suggested is we need to have some more trainings, some more engagement, and potentially some webinars around indirect cost recovery and NICRAs to assist local partners to recover those indirect costs. There was so much more that we had to say, but I'm cognizant of time and I've already used my 3 minutes. So I will go ahead and hand over to group 3. If you could raise your hand, the report back for group 3, and we'll unmute you, and then you can report back on the discussion around policies and procedures.
Hi, my name is Lisa Jamu, and I think you already unmuted me.
Great, Lisa. Yes, please go ahead. Oh, we're not
Okay,
seeing...
it doesn't seem, I need to stop share and then reload again because I think it doesn't capture, are the
No.
slides are in a different place.
This isn't what we wrote.
This is not what you wrote, right? Okay, let me stop.
I think this is one of those challenges of those tech challenges. Mary, are you on the line? Are you able to share your screen?
Yes, she's asked if she can. Go ahead, Mary.
Mary, are you able to share your screen with us so that we can see about the policies and procedures?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. This is Mary.
Great, thank you, Mary.
There's my screen. Lisa, take it from here.
Okay, thank you. So we talked in policies and procedures, we talked about many things, but if you can see in red, the highlighted ones are our top 3 areas. And one of them was budget compliance. And this one alluded to the fact that when we had to start doing the budgets for COP20, for example, we were told not really how to do it, but also the FAST came in late, for example. And so we had to go back, and after we put all of our categories together, then we had to go back and then look at the FAST. And there was a lot of back and forth. And so that process was a little bit cumbersome. However, ASAP has done budget training, and I think that it would be good to have it way in advance before we have to start that budgeting process and the budgets are due. In addition to that, and related to it, is that when Pepfar changes programming frequently, it affects the budgets of what might be in the fixed awards, and therefore more guidance is needed on how to adjust those budgets, how to move items between line items. And the third one that was our top priority was performance against targets, and really having that good communication with the AO on target challenges. Maybe targets are not set according to what is on the ground, or targets are shifting, and kind of how do we reach those targets in that kind of a setup. Just to touch on a couple of the other ones, the branding for Pepfar and USAID was another challenge. And that challenge came mostly in effect of there are branding guidelines and there's resources to look at that, but issues around co-branding, and if more co-branding guidance could be given to us from Pepfar. And then the last one was approval for construction and renovation health facilities. And this was more getting a guidance on getting approval in the process of how to go about getting approval for construction.
Thank you. That sounds like a very practical group. You know, those policies and procedures affect all of us. And it sounds like you had some very practical solutions from the policies and procedures group on how to address some of those challenges. All right, well, moving right along, I'd love to call on group number 3 to be able to join us. And if the reporter could raise their hand, then we can unmute you for group 3 to share their discussion. Or group 4, I'm already on group 4. Wow, I'm already going, I'm one behind. So group 4, sorry, staffing and oversight. Michael? Michael? Sorry,
I can hear you.
There you go. All right. Please go ahead and let us know your discussion on staffing and oversight.
Thank you very much. This group looked at staffing and oversight. The group highlighted the issue of variations between government and project staff payments. An example was given in Kenya, where government staff earn much more than project staff, and yet the project staff have a bigger scope of work, and that brings issues. The solution was to equalize funding between government, state, and other organizations. And then the second challenge was attracting and retaining qualified staff is difficult, especially when you are competing with international NGOs who have high caliber staff. And this may result in some staff leaving the local organizations to international NGOs. It was recommended that there is a need to understand what salary packages are being offered by other competitive NGOs, whether international or local, to ensure the locals have competitive packages to provide and attract or retain equally good staff. The third issue was that most of the local NGOs meet high program management costs, and normally these are not approved by USAID. And yet managing a program, especially oversight, requires competent staff who need to provide oversight. You need also to oversee finance, and you need to attract the best finance people available. But because you don't have like a good overhead, especially the NECRAs are not eligible for local organizations, these ones may affect performance. The recommendation was that Pepfar should develop or modify policies to allow more program management costs to be approved, and also maybe guidance regarding policies on how this could be alleviated. Thank you. That was all from Group 3.
Thank you so much. Another very practical group coming up with some suggestions on how we could, do those salary structure reviews that would help to equalize the imbalance. So thank you very much for sharing the outcomes from Group 4. If you could go ahead and advance to Group 5. I believe we're on Group 5, and that should be
I don't see Group 5 here. Hold on, Catherine.
I'm sure.
Maybe it was hidden.
So Group
Mike,
5,
are you on?
yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. We closed Group 5 because of the attendance, and decided to join the other groups. So for communications, we do not have any challenges or proposed solutions.
Thanks for letting us know, Mike. I know that was sort of a group that we didn't know if people would be up for talking about that. I used an example of one of those tough communication challenges in my opening around communication between AORs and local partners. But I really appreciate that you were able, your colleagues were able to join some of the other groups to continue the conversation. Thanks so much, Mike. I'll turn it over to then Group 6. They were also speaking about local partner capacity.
Hi, this is Catherine. I don't think Desiree and Leilani have been able to join, so I'll walk through the session.
Catherine?
Oh, you're here, Desiree. Fabulous. Over to you. Just in the nick of time.
Okay, thank you. So we had a couple of challenges that we identified. One of them is yet again the flexibility of Usaid and the local partners thinking that they have to request almost for every single new expenditure, and they have to request for too many of the expenses that they have to occur. And one of the solutions was that we found was to try to support local partners to build confidence, because we're also lucky to have 2 USAID mission staff in this session. So it became really interesting between the local partners and us. And one of the points was that local partners in principle have the ability, based on the rules and regulation, to make some expenses, but because of a lack of confidence, they systematically request approval for everything. So building their confidence is a point. Another point is to organize post-award meetings, not only right after the signature of the award, but also more frequently, small pre-award meetings, so that challenges and changes in the program can be discussed throughout the year. And also specifying thresholds where a local partner will be feeling more comfortable to take responsibility in the expenses. Catherine? Oh, next slide. The second challenge was what can the local international organizations like the Prime can provide as support, right? And we discussed that transition mechanism can be an interesting approach to support the local partners. And by transition partner, we want to mention not only technical support to local partners, but also operational and support to local partners. So part of the award, or part of the objective of the award, will be for the Prime organizations to ensure that the local partners are also growing on the operation side and not only deliver programmatic results. And this is it's an approach that is already used in some of the countries. Another element was local partners should be able to evaluate their skills throughout the year. And we thought formalizing the collaboration on the skills to obtain can be done through an MOU. So formalizing the transfer of competences can be done through an MOU between the prime and the local partner. Yes.
Thank you so much, Desiree, for reporting back. Oh, you have a couple more? Go ahead.
Yes, that's the last one.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, another element was the question of the budgeting, and the local partner mentioning the lack of flexibility in budgeting and the small amount of funding, right? And one element was guidance in terms of how they can budget, because budget comes as a ceiling from what we Usaid staff said, so that it's up to the local partners to adjust. But personally, I would like to add another element, that is the 10% de minimis, that could give local partners a bit more flexibility and in the expenses. Another point is during the capacity building process, we developed, I work for ASAP, but a lot of tools and processes has been developed and made available for local partners. But that requires it requires a bit of time and skills to be able to absorb all the tools and processes that are developed. So in the capacity development approach, I think we should also add element around leadership and coaching, and also understand that it takes time for local partners to absorb everything that is created and made available for them.
Thank you, Desiree, very much. Local partner capacity is definitely something that's very close to my heart, and it sounds like you guys had a very fruitful discussion around that. Again, hearing the discussion around de minimis and NICRAs, but that institutional capacity building takes time, and it takes a variety of different methodologies to be able to institutionalize. So thank you very much for the feedback on local partner capacity from our group 6. I understand that group 7 was also dispersed into some of the other sessions. So if group 8, Stephen, I believe you are able to speak, and if you could report back on behalf of the Usaid group that also spoke about local partner capacity.
Hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Stephen Towers. I'm with USAID Washington, and I have the privilege of representing our group. So we had a very rich discussion about local partner capacity from the USAID perspective. And the challenges that we identified kind of fall into 3 buckets, one on staffing, one on policy, and one on structural challenges. So first, the staffing challenges that were identified. Some of our mission colleagues noted that local partners often experience high rates of turnover, where staff will rotate to other organizations when more funding becomes available. And because of this, local partners can suffer in their performance by having a lack of qualified personnel. And finally, it was noted that there's a lack of technical and financial management capacity among some local candidate pools. Now, the solutions that we identified for these challenges would be to perform a needs analysis that compares the targets in a country or SNU compared to the human capacity available within the local partner context. Further, improve human resource management at local partners to hire more qualified staff, and supporting existing staff and fund primary development of personnel within local areas. Next slide, please. Now the policy challenges. It was recognized by our USAID colleagues that there's often inadequate salary and benefit packages to recruit highly qualified staff at local partners. And further, there are antiquated policies for HR, financial management, procurement, and governance, which inhibit local partner performance. And the proposed solutions would be to improve human resource management at local partners to hire more qualified staff, restructure our support to local partners to better balance financial support and technical implementation, and finally, leverage support of central mechanisms and headquarters staff to update policies. Next slide, please. And finally, we recognize some structural challenges that impact our local partner performance. And these include a lack of adequate IT systems, including data management, financial management, and HR, which inhibit our ability to accurately report our performance and manage the programs. Also, local partners are sometimes limited in their geographic scope to implement their programs. Host country governance can negatively impact local partner operations and staff recruitment. And finally, inadequate funds to meet cost sharing agreements. And again, the solutions that our group propose would be to have ASAP support local partners to install data systems to increase accuracy in reporting and internal controls, encourage local partners to form consortiums in order to optimize their coverage. And finally, to have USAID advocate for local partners to operate more freely and without influence in our host countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's good to see the USAID perspective on local partner capacity challenges, as well as some really good solutions that we could take on board to think about the structural and policy challenges that we're facing. So I understand that group 9 might have been folded together. Is that correct, Lindsay?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so then we're going to go straight into our final group. We have just a few more minutes before we hand over to our mission director colleagues and our front office. Marcia, could you raise your hand and we'll promote you so that you can report back. Marcia from group 10.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so this is Marcia Maloney from Usaid, South Africa. And our group took a broad view on, like a high level view of the challenges of policies and procedures on our local partner implementation. And we basically categorize them in terms of technical and administrative challenges, but a lot of our discussion and a lot of the examples emanated from the hindrance of or the challenges of administrative policies and procedures. So some of the examples I think that have already been highlighted have to do with where there's high turnover of staff, particularly key personnel. And what we discussed was if you then, as USAID, are working with local partners to get an understanding of how to implement those policies and procedures, you then have to do it again and again and again because of the issue of institutional memory and the high turnover of staff. And another thing is that there's a challenge again when local partner policies may differ from USAID policies. Again, here an example that we gave was sometimes the policies themselves for local partners don't exist. So maybe they haven't documented policies or to align with USAID policies, or they don't exist at all. So another example that we had was with the G2G as a local partner. So our discussion was around the difficulty of implementing with host government. And we were really excited to hear that there's going to be a review of ADS 205, and that would really be, we would be more thoughtful in terms of thinking about how to implement using G2Gs as a mechanism. And then also having learned that it is also about where the G2G is implemented. It might be easier at the provincial level of implementation, rather than at the national or higher level of implementation. So another thing is some of the solutions we talked about is that for new concepts such as co-creation, it would be good to have those really reinforced, fleshed out, and having a standard understanding and guideline, not only in post-award, but much earlier. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
We can,
Yes, we
Marsha.
can hear you.
There's just
Another sound.
Desiree, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Go ahead, Marsha.
Again, the way to address, technical and administrative policy challenges is again to really have a lot of additional training if required, and then our policies to be more flexible to suit local partner needs, including government, and then also to start the support much earlier prior to implementation than at a later stage. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Marsha. And I want to thank our facilitators and all of the local partners for participating, our USAID mission colleagues for participating in these breakaway groups. I hear a lot of intersections across from one to the other. And so I have the great privilege to introduce James Maloney, the Deputy Director for the Office of HIV and AIDS, to discuss this with our mission director colleagues who have joined us for this session. Over to you, James.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone that's stuck with us. I see we're now up over 200, and I think this has been, a great few days to really focus in on the interaction. There's no replacement for us all being together in person. I remember very well a year ago when we were together in Johannesburg, and I hope at the next time we do this, we'll be back together again. But I do want to thank both Mark Messick and Rebecca. Mark, the mission director for USAID Kenya and East Africa, and Rebecca, USAID mission director for South Africa and Southern Africa. And I want to open it up first for them to give some of their perspective. I saw they were on earlier, so they were able to get some of the readout from all of these local groups. And then I know in terms of this session, I have a few questions and reflections just from what we were getting. I thought that previous session was excellent. Some very specific feedback and actually some very specific recommendations on what we can do. So I'm going to come back to some of those, but I want to give both Mark and Rebecca the chance to start out with any of their reflections, how they see local partners, both in their experience over the years, working and leading USAID missions, in particular in the countries they are now, and in the regions they support. But maybe Rebecca, I can turn it over to you first, and your initial thoughts here on how the expansion of our work with local partners is really setting us up for both the acceleration to epidemic control and the sustained response. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone and also to hear from everyone. It was really interesting and important to hear from all of the different groups in the presentations on the challenges and also partly some solutions as well. Here in South Africa and Southern Africa, we work with a lot of local partners. South Africa definitely is one of the missions with the largest local partners, I think, for USAID. Just to give an example, we have 2.1 million individuals on ART, and they're supported just by a group of 5 local care and treatment partners. And we have local partners in all of our activities. And we've recently started to work with our government partners. We have 2 G2G partners, and we're looking at going down to work with our provincial governments to work on important health activities with them as well. So I definitely hear and have seen and worked through a lot of those challenges that were identified earlier in this presentation. And you're absolutely correct, having the local context and some of the challenges in that, whether it's on working with HEPOPs or 6-MMD prescriptions, it is a different environment depending on which country you are living in. I will say it has been absolutely inspirational to be working with the partners that we have here. Because we have been doing this for so long, some of our local partners have actually started to not only work in South Africa, but have gone to work in other countries in the region, which is just wonderful to see them take their talent. But it does take a lot of work, and as someone said, a lot of time. We cannot expect that the local partners will be able to be up and running and getting to that stage on day one. So we actually have a contract with an international partner to help them work on a variety of issues, whether it's data analysis or short-term staffing gaps, or making sure that they have their organization set up. Because I don't think a lot of our local partners could do that if they didn't have a little bit of help every so often. But I think one of the most important things is really regular meetings and full transparency. I think it was mentioned with all the changing targets and the changing challenges, we have to be very, very open and honest with our local partners. Because as was also mentioned, we're not necessarily always the most flexible organization. And so we need to be able to give them the most amount of insight into what we are thinking, what we might be changing. What we have seen as well is a tremendous appreciation from our government in South Africa on our 2 government-to-government partnerships. We have one with the Department of Social Development and one with the Department of Basic Education. And we are going to have a meeting actually next week with the Treasury to look at working in the provincial government of Western Cape. And then we're going to try to move to other provincial governments throughout South Africa. But this is very, very welcomed by the South African government because they absolutely see this as, their ability to sustain the gains that Pepfar has made, which we still have some more area to improve, but they really, we want to make sure that it is sustainable as possible, and especially the government does as well. So I think you'll see a lot of appreciation from the local government when we do start to do more with the local governments and also with local partners. But it's a lot of time, and we're only talking about like external staff. We also need to talk about internal staff and making sure that we have people who really can work to support them, whether it's in financial management, whether it's on making sure that they do know how to analyze their data. It takes both like inside help and outside to make sure they succeed. And sometimes it really is not easy. You run into not only challenges with the local context, it's also following all of our regulations, whether it's on audit or whether it's on communications, as I think somebody was mentioning, it was a complication there. But it has been really important to see, and I think we are over 75% local partners now here in South Africa, and we're trying to do that more in the region. So we're actually looking at hiring a local USPSC, local partner contracting assistant to be able to work not only in South Africa, but throughout the region. I think we can leave it there, and we can talk about more examples or let Mark have a chance to talk about how things are going with him, and happy to take any questions as they come. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And I am going to come back to you with a few questions. But yeah, Mark, I wanted to turn it to you for your initial thoughts. And then it looks like our cameras are working now. So we'll try to be on camera so at least you can see us if we're not there in person. Mark?
Thanks, James. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, it was. You all had a pretty good discussion. There were a lot of issues that came up that certainly provoked a lot of messages that I wrote down and some comments. But let me just try to take a step back for you and give you an idea about how we've approached the whole process of moving to local partners. We've actually made a management decision to have a serious pivot for all of our care and treatment to go, the majority of which was with international partners to local partners. And so when you try to do something like that at scale, you've got a lot of challenges to look at in terms of ensuring that you get continuity of operations and that your number one job is making sure there is continuity of care for patients. And so that's a big ticket issue. So what are some of the challenges that we're seeing in terms of the local partner space? I mean, one of those is, it's really important for local partners to understand that from the Pepfar point of view, this is all about partnership and performance. It is not about paternalism and patience. And so those are some of the tough messages that, local partners need to deal with. So, and then you also need to understand from the inside of USAID, while we look at the partnership from the point of view of working together to try to achieve a common goal, our Inspector General looks at you as a grantee who must abide by USAID rules and regulations. And so there are a lot of multiple stakeholders and actors inside this space who have their own perspective about what it means to be a local partner for AID, and AID is one of those. And we look at it from the point of view of trying to build out a system that has some sustainability to it. But the challenge is managing all of these other equities as we go forward. So the biggest issue, I think, is in terms of local partners is how you interface yourselves with national governments and local governments. And I think one of the things that we have learned through this process in Kenya is that you need to make sure that it is incredibly formalized, that it is structured in some kind of an agreement, and that the engagement is defined in terms of roles and responsibilities, and it is regular so that government has full visibility on what you are doing. This is not a time for trade unionism in terms of trying to get government and to do things you want them to do because you have the money now. It's a time for you to be able to understand that you need a strategic partnership with government, and what does that need to look like. So it's an opportunity for local organizations to enter into a much more mature relationship with their local governments. I mean, here we've established broader mission memorandums of understanding with county governments, and I think then with all of the facilities in that county, we are determining targets and those kinds of things, and we're doing that with county officials, and we will continue to do that through the local partnership. One of the corollaries of this is that that the IP will know, at least in our programming, will take a bit of a back seat to USAID staff in the management of that government relationship. And that really will help give you some space to be able to have the opportunity to deal with some of the issues through us rather than enter into anything contentious directly with county governments. And hopefully that triangle can be a virtuous space for resolving challenges, because the challenges are there and they're going to continue. So hopefully that will be something that we'll be able to work at. And one of the other pieces of this is that we really want to make sure as well that you have mutual accountability with your subs. And it's not just a matter of a transaction for money, it's also a strategic partnership, and that you are part of the leadership in developing this new kind of a ecosystem for a more viable healthcare system at the local level. So there are a lot of opportunities for that. Let me also say a few things about accountability and transparency. I think it's very important that the local partners be examples of accountability and transparency. And I think we've got to figure out what that needs to look like in practical terms, in terms of what's disclosed, what's not disclosed. I tell people when I go to make big speeches in Kenya that I'm the chief accounting officer for USAID in Kenya. I'm responsible for $500 million a year of US taxpayer money. And by the definition of any Kenyan, I must be a thief. And so if you know that, and you know that the perception of the working environment is one of suspicion, then you need to really address that in a proactive way. And we're going to work with our local partners to do that. We have had some examples already in local partnerships of fraud, waste, and abuse. And we deal with them expeditiously as soon as we discover them. And we have a very positive working relationship with our Inspector General. But in general, what we're trying, the message that we're trying to give to our local partners is, look, you may hire people and there may be bad actors in your midst. You need to make sure that your systems are strong. And so we do conduct a NUPAS, a pre-award assessment to look at your strengths and weaknesses before we sign a grant with you or a contract. I'm just going to, most of these will be grants. And so, there's a real opportunity to set up a serious capacity building agenda. We're also building, we also have a third party that we've hired to help with the capacity building. And it's not going to be sort of sitting in a classroom capacity building. It's going to be more of a learning by doing modality of capacity building. We think that's a much more effective way to do continuous improvement. So I guess the sort of the last thing I'll say is that in our case, I know some of our local partners are thinking about having some of our US-based current prime partners as subs. We've learned that can be a double-edged sword. It can be a positive way to build some quick capabilities, but at the same time, if it's window dressing and then the sub is marginalized, there can be some delays in achieving the kind of capacity that you need to achieve. So I think there's it's really an exciting space to work in. I think the whole issue of figuring out what this civil society NGO relationship with government is a real learning opportunity to help these host governments across the Pepfar space understand how that relationship can work in a very positive way, outsourcing some of the functions of the healthcare system. And hopefully we can move towards what the system ought to look like in 15 years with government actually doing the role that it was meant to do, and that NGOs as local partners for AID right now can become local partners and work effectively with host governments as well. So let me stop there. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Mark. And a reminder to folks too, while we have Mark and Rebecca on, feel free to put questions in the box, in the chat box, and I'll try to monitor that as we go through. One of the questions I wanted to put back to you both, or feel free to respond, but the initial group here on local context, I think it was group 1, raised the issue of at some points in time where policy, whether there were some specific examples on multi-month dispensing, there were some specific examples on how the government policy is directed toward working with key populations, where those may be barriers. And I know if maybe you could give some perspective on how you see kind of that USAID mission role in engagement with governments, and how you see the implementation side and that kind of community engagement aspect that the local partners bring to the table in some of those important policy discussions. So I wondered if you could reflect on, but given your experience, how you've approached, because I know this has come up in a number of countries where you've worked, how you've approached some of those policy discussions with government, how you've engaged with local partners to have a good kind of ground truthing of what the issues are, what the recommendations are, and how we make that kind of balance on implementation and then USAID's role, and sometimes being in the middle to really advocate. And I've seen this happen, quite frankly, in those COP meetings when everyone's sitting around a table and you've got government, you've got civil society, you've got some of the multilateral donors, and you've got Pepfar, CDC, USAID, DOD, the other implementing agencies at the table. But I wonder if you could reflect on some of that initial kind of challenge and solution suggested by the local context group in Group 1. And Rebecca or Mark, feel free to jump in.
Okay, I can jump in. I'm just trying to see if I can get my video on, which I seem like it doesn't want to do. Sorry, I am trying, but it seems to be stuck on no video. Oh, actually, hold on. I think I can get there. Okay, that's it. So we are currently struggling with the 6MMD here in South Africa. We had worked with South Africa for many months to try to figure out how to increase, because we obviously see the huge potential of going from 3MMD to 6MMD, but the South African government is very concerned about having sufficient supplies and how they're going to handle giving certain people different prescriptions. And we actually had a fairly heated discussion earlier this week. We had agreed upon 2 pilots throughout the country to try to do this. I mean, so that was and we meet weekly and we talk to them, and CDC is there and our whole Pepfar team is there. And they're just very, very concerned about making that change, and very concerned about starting it and then having to stop it if they can't continue it in the future. So it is something that we are working with them quite a bit on. I won't say we have a perfect solution for it yet, but it really is helpful to have that constant communication on it. And one of the things we've been trying to do as well is show the success stories in other countries. Sometimes I think it can be difficult to say, well, this is what worked in the United States, or this is what worked in Europe. But if you say this is what worked in Zambia, or this is what worked in Kenya, the South African government is much more willing to listen to it, because they think that it is a context that is more similar to theirs, and that they may be able to address the challenges in a similar way. So that's been one approach that we have been taking. I will say OGAC is pressuring us pretty significantly on that. So we're trying to definitely thread the needle between the concerns of the South African government and the pressure from OGAC to make sure that we can support it. But it requires constant communication, and sometimes you get 2 steps forward and sometimes there's 1 step back. And this week was a little bit of a step back, but we went back to the table, and I think we're actually making a little bit of progress. But I think you have to understand, like, when you do have these complicated challenges, that it is not always linear, and that sometimes you are going to have to keep going to the table to push the really important work that we do, and it requires constant communication.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's a great perspective. And I know often it's, where Pepfar, and Mark, I think, said this, but where Pepfar sometimes asks for what seems impossible, it's in on all of us to make it possible. And we've actually seen that happen. I don't think we'd be where we are today in the epidemic without that constant push. I know on the technical side, and I see it reflected in some of the comments and even some of the questions coming in now from Simon, the reality is that many of you have all been implementing for many years in the countries where you're working as local partners. That you may have been doing that as subs. Now you may, be, some of you have been prime partners for quite some time. Some of you may be newer in terms of that prime relationship with USAID. But as it was kind of reflected in one of the earlier group report outs, that technical conversation has been one that's been ongoing for many years, where there's still, and I'm seeing some need is on the support on the operational side, the capacity on the kind of operations, finance, some of the challenges faced in workforce and staffing. And so I wonder, Mark or Rebecca, if you could speak a little bit about, and Rebecca, certainly you've mentioned, obviously the partners in South Africa, the vast majority being local and have been for quite some time, but some of them started out as smaller organizations. So could you reflect a little bit about, how we approach both that kind of technical conversation? Yes, we're going to always be driven on those targets that come from Pepfar. They're always going to push us to accelerate toward epidemic control, really to hit the 90-90-90, to make sure we're not missing out in geographies, missing out in specific populations. But at the same time, while we have that technical, the real need to focus on some of the operational and just how we set up local partners for success in managing that funding that comes from the US government. And I'll say, and I've said this before, when I was AOR, COR with local partners, USAID's not always the easiest partner to accept money from. There are challenges with working with us, but we want to see that succeed. And so it's been raised here in a few of the report outs on this kind of operational focus, the need for some continued approach there. Mark, you talked about actually learning while doing, bringing on a third party to come alongside and provide that support. But wanted to get your reflection both on how you've approached this over time to get to where you are today and what you see the need, going forward in terms of that operational capacity piece.
Thanks. Let me say a couple things about that. So, I've worked on surge strategies in Uganda and Kenya, and one of the interesting things about those is that what the big shift to make a surge strategy work and to really start figuring out how to achieve these targets is that you have to make learning very central to how you do business. And so that's across the board. That's learning to build your systems. That's learning to change your mindset, because in a lot of cases, local partners hire former government officials who come in with a government mindset. And this is not that at all. This is, when you work with USAID, it is a whole different breed of dealing with performance and dealing with accountability that's unique to the development space. But there are really a series of issues around performance in terms of learning and how you decide to set targets. So in surge strategies, we set weekly targets by facility, and we didn't work alone in a silo. We worked with government, we worked with local stakeholders, and we figured out how to pull in communities. And I mean, one of the things that really has to change in these dynamics is the relationship between communities and facilities. We know that, and one of the things that USAID got away from in the initial years of Pepfar was its comparative advantage across government in terms of doing community-based healthcare. And I think that's something that we're seeing is very important moving forward. So there's a lot of opportunities for learning, but you can't just sort of take it as something that is going to happen. You need to manage that learning. And so having a very clear collaborative learning and adaptive approach to the program is a way to have a rapid learning of how to engage with us and work with us and be able to do it effectively. And I think if you can do that, that's really important. The other piece to really make this whole issue of policy work is that the big advantage of Pepfar is that we have a very tight connection between the global and the local. And so, and the missions serve as that interlocutor. And so there's a real opportunity. If you look, if you see how fast the Pepfar world actually transitioned from TLE to TLD, it was a pretty amazing transformation as it went forward. And so there are a lot of things in terms of policies like the differentiated service delivery models in terms of all of that, and you see, but I think in most cases with host governments, you can find some way to set up pilots, to create learning opportunities and work things out with them, because in some ways, the way that Pepfar drives this process it also helps drive, even though the ministry may not get a lot of resources from us in terms of how we work, it really helps to drive them to a more modernized look at their relationships as public sector officials with the populations that they serve. And so, you know, in many ways, what we say here in Kenya is that many people still in the public sector understand the relationship with citizens under the old colonial administration mentality. And so we want that to be a much more modern relationship of serving patients and where the patient is king, and that there is always an opportunity to engage the patient and learn from the patient and not just tell the patient what to do.
Thank you, Mark. I'm seeing a question in the chat here, and it relates, I think, to some of the comments made, and I think it was Group 7 on local partner capacity and that USAID interaction. Mentioned the need, you know, so yes, there's when the award's made, those initial post-award meetings, but the need for more frequent engagement between partners in the USAID kind of management team, AOR, COR, AO, CO, the whole kind of management team at the mission. And then there's a question here in the chat that says, you know, how maybe you can provide some perspective on how and within your missions, Rebecca and Mark, you approach this, but how do the missions work on communication between USAID and local partners? Are there some things you've seen in that management model that are best practices that we should ensure are shared with other countries?
Thank you, James. And it's a great question. Obviously, COVID has made us change some of the way that we monitor our partners, but we have found that our virtual check-ins or site visits have actually been very helpful during this time. We have had a couple of ways that we're trying to address the local capacity of our partners. Our financial management team within USAID has had trainings maybe once a quarter, every 6 months for our local partners. And they've actually traveled to different parts of the country to make it easier for some of our partners who cannot travel as easily to Pretoria to go there. And so they have had training, and this is from our staff in-house. And that has been very helpful. So we have our financial management staff, our legal staff, our auditors come by, our contracting office staff, and of course our technical staff do various sessions on that training. With COVID and obviously the restrictions on travel that we have gone to a much more virtual platform to do site visits. And we have weekly meetings with our local partners on care and treatment. And then depending on the size of the program and the newness of the local partner, we actually have weekly 20-minute sessions with them to talk about various issues. It can be something relatively straightforward like filing, which can really make a huge difference, or it could be on how to address an audit challenge that they're working through. But we have found that it really does take a lot of time to manage that relationship internally, but we also do have an international partner that we can call on if needed. So like if the challenge is too hard or our staff are too busy to do that, we are able to do that, and they can actually bring in additional staff. I know Mark was mentioning that some of the challenges having an international partner as a sub. So this has been sort of an alternate way to do it where they're not a sub partner, but they can be on a long treaty Y or a long visit to that local partner as they're addressing a significant issue. And that has been, because we do have so many local partners, it has definitely been something that has been cost effective to be able to address the challenge early in that relationship. As Mark was mentioning, you know, Pepfar is not forgiving if you do not meet your targets and are not able to adjust to the new priorities. And the local partners can't not adjust as quickly as they need to. So between the staff here and the support offices here too, I think it's important to recognize that it's not only Pepfar and staff or our health staff that need to work on this. It is also our legal staff and our financial management staff and our contracting staff, because a lot of it is really very demanding, and we need to make sure that the entire mission is on board to support these local partners.
James, let me just add one thing to that, and that at least for the Kenya mission, what we took a bold step, and with some help from Global Health Bureau and James and Clint, we are actually augmenting our staffing pattern and doubling the staff. We're going to have 50 new staff to help work with local partners and make sure that we get the kind of performance we need, and help manage all these relationships as well, especially with government, as Kenya has a more devolved type of government with 47 counties that have their own structures, their own ministries, all these things. So we think that we need to be involved in this in a much more close relationship rather than anything at a distance. So we're going to be there to help make things work. There will be likely, the way we've worked with Surge is weekly meetings, sometimes collective meetings on a bi-weekly basis with all IPs to have discussions. And we will be carefully monitoring performance and trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, and be able to pivot as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Rebecca. You know, one of the comments made, I think it was in the last group, even on some of the policies and procedure reflection, talked a bit about the role of G2G, and I think, you know, maybe putting that into context for most of the group here from, you know, local NGO groups, when we talk about a sustained response, and, you know, there are previous kind of conversations with Pepfar some years ago about country ownership and what that meant in terms of it's not just a host government, it's also the local private sector, it's the local NGOs, it's the faith-based organizations, it's the civil society that's active in the country. It's kind of a collective that positions us for sustainability, and really it's what's made the implementation and success of Pepfar possible. And so I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on, you know, there's been in kind of recent years more movement toward some G2G agreements, but also not just at the national level, at the provincial or county level, whether that's been G2G with funding or establishment of formal MOUs. How you see that interaction between, you know, any of that kind of funding and work that happens via G2G, but also the long run, you know, funding and positioning of the local partners that are also working in those provinces or districts or counties, whatever they may be. Could you talk a little bit, and thanks, Debbie, the government to government agreements. So this is where Usaid directly funds either a national government, a Ministry of Health, or a Ministry of Social Affairs, Education, or a provincial level. Can you talk a little bit how you see that kind of progressing into the future as we move toward more local partnerships, more funding going through local partners? It includes G2G, but ultimately it needing to be that mix of implementation, leveraging what's there in country in terms of the response.
After you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, the government to government is relatively new here in South Africa. We just finished our first year with the two national departments, the Department of Basic Education and the Department of Social Development. And we had been working with them through our partners to work on these key initiatives. And so it was a little bit more of a natural transition to move from our partners supporting these entities to going to them directly. This was done prior to the new guidance in ADS 220. And I think it would be a little bit faster now, but I would just make sure that everyone understands the time frame for doing government to government. And it's not all on the USG side. Obviously, we have our requirements to do the due diligence and to make sure that the milestones are clear and that everything is proper on our side. It does take a long time to get the equivalent done on the other government side. So I think when you are planning on doing it, really look at the timing within the COP cycle, because it will take longer than you anticipate, and it is a little bit harder to do each action than you would hope it would be. We are now starting the conversations on the provincial one, and it's going very, very well. I think it's really important to hear from the provincial governments what exactly they want. And some of them, it's very easy, you know, it's an MOU on a very specific thing. Other times it's trying to coordinate, try to put a coordinating body within the provincial government so that they can actually understand what all the partners are doing in that province, and the other donors as well. And that's something, you know, on a very, very high level, what Western Cape is looking for is to make sure that they can track and understand all of the health activities that are going on in Western Cape. But it is not easy, because even with, when we've been talking to National Treasury where the money goes through, you know, there's a lot of discussions on how would we actually get the money from the USG to a provincial government. And they're like, is it really a true government to government if it's not at a national level? So whenever you do it, you just make sure you budget more time for it than you necessarily thought you would. And I would also encourage to start with a smaller amount of money to see if they really can do it. Going back to the, you know, you have to make sure you reach your targets. Sometimes it can be hard to you know, really absorb a significant program quickly. And so like the one that we're looking for Western Cape, it's just going to be about $1 million to start. You know, we're not looking at putting a lot of money in right away, and just kind of making sure that we can get this built up before we start putting more money and more responsibilities on them. It is a very different relationship, and it does give you a different seat at the table, which is always really helpful when you're trying to also push other policy changes. So it is something that I definitely am really happy that we have done. But as I said, just budget more time for it than you ever thought you might need.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of things. I mean, I think there's a big question behind the whole issue of G2G, and that is, what should the health system that is well performing look like without us? And I think that's the big question we have to ask ourselves. And once we start looking at that, then we can sort of break it down. You know, we know that the governments that we work with have very significant inefficiencies. Sometimes they have a lot of staff, and then they don't have a lot of funds to actually do stuff. So we can actually leverage that staff to do some of the work we need. But then we also have to be careful not to distort the services that are provided, so that it's not just Pepfar centric or HIV centric when there are other non-communicable diseases out there as well that can have a tremendous effect on people's health. So we've got to figure out what that sweet spot looks like. And I think this is a learning process. I don't think people have answers to these things. But, you know, in the basic Pepfar side of things, we do have specific issues, and we expect our implementing partners as local partners, they will have MOUs with county governments, because we still know that we have HRH challenges in local facilities, and we're going to have to figure out how we make sure that those local facilities are supported in some way. And so we're expecting our local partners to have those kinds of relationships with county governments, and then we can help monitor that and figure out how we transition those things from the get-go to be a G2G relationship rather than just them managing that relationship over the 5-year period. There are issues around supply chain as well, where there's government has an important role to play. We have to understand how to manage that. The performance side of things as well. It's a lot of surge strategies that we've done with local entities. The local governments have been really appreciative of figuring out how to better organize themselves to be able to deliver for their citizens. And so there's a capacity building component in terms of learning with us about how to do these things. And lastly, we all have the big challenge on the strategic information side of looking at electronic medical records to try to deal with loss to follow-up and all those kinds of things. And that's going to require collaboration across government with government, but also across the local partners themselves.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rebecca. You know, one of the, and I see it here in another question coming in from the chat, is really about how do we, I'm just reading here now. How do we really ensure some of the best practices or principles, procedures, policies that are there are available across the board, not just in one partnership or one country? And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit, because you both sit in kind of, you know, Kenya as a central kind of hub there in the East Africa region, obviously South Africa also in the Southern Africa region. If you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, either what you've seen or what you'd recommend about, you know, how we take what works in a given country, whether it's on the operational side of that kind of USAID partner management interaction, or even on the technical side, or some of the some of the innovations you're talking about in terms of oversight and local capacity building, how we make that more broadly available. And I'll add, you know, I've seen there's been a lot of questions brought up around NICRA's indirects, the de minimis that came up, and when Clint and I met with some of you earlier in the week. I think we can agree as a next step that there is some specific support needed on that issue, and probably need for us to convene partners going forward there. But I wonder, just broadly on this question coming in from the chat on, you know, how we better ensure as USAID those best practices are shared across local partners. I mean, this forms one of them, but what else from your perspective could we do also with that kind of perspective you provide in the region leadership on the USAID mission side?
Thanks. I'll try to be quick because I'm definitely noticing the comments about we only have a few minutes left in the session. I definitely think sessions like this are extraordinarily helpful. Last year, before we really started a lot of our G2G work, Zambia hosted a session for those interested in government to government. So we actually had, I think, 3 or 4 people go from this mission to that mission to really learn from them about some of the best practices that they have had. And that was instrumental for us to start off on the right foot with G2G. And so I think moments like that are extraordinarily helpful. So if you know a certain country is very good at something, to really make sure we do share that with our colleagues, either in person or virtually, to really help people on some of the steep learning curves that the first person going through it did. I know we tried to do a little bit of it with the ventilators, and I know it's something that we're getting maybe a little bit better at, sharing some of those best practices and sharing some of the models, because it really does make a difference to support each other through that. And I know I encourage moments like this one, and with the one that they had in Zambia with the G2G session, that we learned a lot from them on.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm also noticing the chat saying we should be wrapping up. I guess I'll end by just thanking Rebecca, both you and Mark, for your leadership. It's so impressive that we can spend, you know, an hour going through some of these questions with you, and you both are, you know, not just providing that vision for the work in the region. And it's not, and your responsibilities aren't just Pepfar. You're there advancing a whole development agenda, but you're so articulate on and in the details of our Pepfar implementation. And so we're grateful for that leadership that you provide for the mission. Recognize that you wear many hats. This is just one of them. But I think we all benefit from your leadership, both in country, but then across the continent, and frankly across the agency, as we think of ways to, you know, improve on how we interact and how we advance, you know, both communication, the management interaction, but also ultimately the implementation. So thanks, Mark. You're right. Ambassador Burks would not expect any less from us. I will say, some of you may have been on the Scientific Advisory Board yesterday. Ambassador Burks took a break from she's going around the states in the US in her role as on COVID-19 response here domestically. She took some time out, talked to the scientific advisory board, and really, and I want to say this, gave a shout out to our local partners around the globe. She had a few slides on where USAID has been advancing in the local partnership, but really fundamentally thanked the local partners. When we looked at Q3 data, USAID had actually added people to the treatment cohort between Q2 and Q3. And I think there was a lot of concern with COVID and some of the shutdowns that we would be losing people from treatment. But I think all of the dedication and frankly from our local partners over the last several months, dealing with the various lockdowns and blockades and whatever it may have been, finding ways to ultimately, continue services to clients, in particular those that were already on treatment, is really impressive. I can't thank you enough. That came from Ambassador Birx yesterday as well. But want to thank you all, Mark and Rebecca, again for engaging in this panel. To the whole group that's been with us this morning, I see we've been adding to the sessions of folks who've dealt with some of the IT issues. But I'll turn it over now back to our moderator, who I think is going to help us wrap up and get into the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, Rebecca, Mark, for those comments and responding to our local partners. The platform will probably kick us off at 5 minutes after. And I invite everyone to please join the closing plenary, where we'll hear again from Clint, but also from two of our oldest local partners, and talk about their experience from going from a high-risk partner to a high-capacity partner. So it's very exciting to hear their experiences. So thank you all for this session, and we'll meet again in the next Zoom for the closing plenary. Thank you very, very much.